He's been a longtime friend of mine and has given me a lot of guidance over the years, and I'm over the moon to have him here as a visiting artist. Please help me welcome Matt Talbot.
Hello. Gosh, how do I follow that? So before I really get into it, I just want to thank the university for having me. This has been really, really fun. I'm super excited to be here. And I want to thank Eric for putting it together, and Eric and Erica for hosting my wife Jen and I for the last few days. And thank you to Bob and Hannah for the wonderful work they did making my stuff look good in the gallery. It was really exciting to see that. So I am really honored to be here. And so with that being said, I'll start with a confession. After the last couple days walking around this building and seeing the amazing student work and talking with talented students and seeing some of the professors in action, I am intimidated to be talking to you all today. You can call it a healthy case of imposter syndrome, or my usual kind of like low level of self-confidence. But I'll just say right off the bat, again, setting expectations, I'm well aware that I'm not the most naturally talented illustrator you will come across. The things I cannot draw outnumber the things I can draw by a margin that is humongous. I have way more weaknesses than strengths. And you know, someday I effortlessly hope to be able to draw hands, but that day will not be today. And when I get into this talk and I show you what I was drawing and designing when I was in college, you will laugh at what you see. So, you know, to be honest, knowing Eric for a long time, I've seen student work from over the years, and I know the quality of stuff that people here put out. So when I was thinking about what I could talk to you today, what would have any value, I think I know what that is. Despite my very many aforementioned limitations, I have ended up working with a bunch of my dream clients. Mondo, Marvel, Sony, Archie, the stuff you heard Eric talk about. And even coming from a place of modesty, I feel like that's pretty cool, and I can't quite believe it myself sometimes. Because after 20 years in the business, I know that finding work is really hard, and finding work you like can be even harder. So what I'm going to tell you tonight is how I got that work, because I feel like that will be useful. And there's not a big secret to it. Every project that I got that I dreamed of getting all came about because I did a personal project that no one asked for that I put online. And that's kind of how simple it is, but let's dig into that a little more. So I will first give you my definition of what a personal project is, at least for the purpose of this talk. I define it as any creative project that you undertake that no one has asked you to do. So a personal project is something that you're going to take up because it's something you want to do. And it can be for any number of reasons. Why do you do it? It could be for fun. That's a simple one. It could be for practice, because we all need that. It'll make you better. It could be because it'll make your portfolio stronger, or because you're hoping to get work in whatever genre of personal project you're putting out. I learned that when you're starting out in this business, there's nothing more important you can do than build your portfolio. And of course, you're doing that here with your curriculum. You're going to get class assignments that will be worthy of putting in your portfolio. But you can supplement that with personal projects. Doing a personal project won't just build your portfolio, though. It will build your skills at the same time. And I think that is going to land you in a better place than if you relied just on classwork or if you waited for someone to give you an assignment. So this idea of personal projects is something I do feel qualified to talk to you about because I have done so many of them. And in fact, I can honestly tell you that the only reason I'm in graphic design and illustration at all is because of a personal project I undertook in college. So let's go back. I got to tell you a little bit about myself. Who is this guy? The things that I think will be useful to you that I'm going to tell you come from lessons that I picked up as I was slowly coming up to speed and ended up in design and illustration. So I'm just going to go through quickly and tell you how I ended up in this room today trying to tell you something useful. Eric told you my name is Matt Talbot. I live in New Hampshire. I work at a design firm called Brown & Company, and I graduated from the University of New Hampshire with a bachelor's degree in English. And yes, English, not design, not illustration, and I'll get to that in a minute. First, I'll back up even a little further. When I was a kid and you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to play for the Miami Dolphins. So, mind you, I did not even watch football or understand what it is. It looks like my wife is hearing this for the first time. All I knew when I was a kid is that I liked this logo and I liked this orange and teal. I couldn't get enough of the logo. I stared at this little mini helmet that I had for a long time. And that probably should have told me something, but it did not. As I grew up, I stayed sort of disinterested in football. I like it now. But I became increasingly interested in comics. My first comic love was Garfield. Then I started graduating to the slightly older stuff like Batman, and I'm a kid of the 80s, so G.I. Joe was big, loved Spidey. Fantastic Four was the first comic I ever subscribed to, and Archie comics were cheap for a big digest, so I used to buy those because it really stretched my little kid bucks. And loving this stuff grew to trying to draw this stuff, poorly as you can see. And that led to classes of art in high school, and eventually me thinking that I could go to college to study art. And in fact, I did go to UNH and to study art. But I didn't know the difference between fine art and commercial art. And so I didn't know that this comic type stuff that I liked wouldn't go over well with my professors who wanted me to draw nude figures and still lifes of oranges. In my first semester there, I put a Godzilla toy into a still life, and my teacher lost it. So my professors did not like me, and I was not smart enough to understand how to adapt what I was doing to the curriculum that I had chosen to go into. That's on me. But for the first year of school, I could do nothing right in my professors' eyes. And when I tried to figure out how to give them what they want, it wasn't good for them, and it wasn't good for me. I just didn't know how to reconcile the halves. So I flamed out of the art department pretty hard, and I did not know what to do. I was demoralized, and I ended up in the English department by default. And I'll say English has served me very well because so much of design is communication, so it helped, but I didn't get a formal design training. And more importantly, I quit art, just cold turkey. The thing I loved my whole life, I just stopped with. I didn't draw for literally 3 years. So how the heck did I end up in this field? The truth is I didn't know this field existed until I was in my second senior year of high school. I could have graduated at the end of my first senior year, but I didn't have a plan and I didn't know what to do, so I just decided to stay. I decided not to graduate. And with an extra year ahead of me and my English degree basically wrapped up, I needed something to fill my schedule. I needed something to do. And that something was a minor in art. Because you see, in my first senior year, the first of two, I actually had started drawing again for fun, but with my non-dominant left hand. I don't even remember how or why I started this. It seems like kind of a college kid thing to do as I think about it now. It seemed like a good idea to me. And I think what it was is that drawing with my left hand, my non-dominant hand, took the pressure off of needing to do something good. It's your non-dominant hand. How good can it be? And I'll talk about this in a little bit. This concept will come in useful, I promise. So tuck that away just for a little bit. So what did I do with my new left-handed drawing and my time in my second senior year? I used it to start drawing comics for the student newspaper, and I called it the left hand of production. It was basically patterned after political comics, but with a UNH, University of New Hampshire bent. I went after fraternities, the school administration, anything that made me mad, anything that amused me, basically anything that I could turn into a joke. I wasn't thinking about this project this way at the time, but this comic was a personal project. No one asked me to do this. I decided to do it and I submitted it to the paper. And it actually turned out to be the most important personal project of my life, because by that second senior year, I kind of became known for this comic around campus. And somehow the editor of the UNH student newspaper saw my the student magazine, saw my comics and asked me if I wanted to design the UNH student magazine because the designer had graduated. And I said to her, "What do you mean graphic designer?" I honestly had no idea what she meant. And she was undeterred by my ridiculous question. She said, you know, maybe we give you some text and we give you some photos, or maybe you find photos and illustrations, or maybe you make them and you turn it all into a magazine. All of a sudden it occurred to me that yes, someone had to do this job. Someone had to turn the text and the photos into a magazine, or a book, or a cereal box, or any number of things. So I realize how silly this seems, but I've never claimed to be a smart guy. And in the moment, this concept of being a graphic designer blew my mind. So my personal project comic strip led me to this field in a completely ridiculous and roundabout way. So, of course, I agreed to this very modestly paid position. Not that I deserved money at all, because I did not know what I was doing. They sat me down at a computer with a copy of Quark Express, which was the page layout program of the day before Adobe swallowed everything. And they said, "Hey, here you go, good luck." There was nominally an internet in those days. I'm dating myself, but it would be hard to explain that you couldn't just hop on the internet and find out how to lay out a magazine. There was no r/how do I design a magazine. I had this dusty 500-page Quark Express manual, and that was about it. It was a very different world back then. Somehow I did piece it together. A friend took photos. I made collages for some artwork. My wife, who I went to college with, made collages for some of the stories. I got friends to do other things. I took photos of toys, which was an idea I ripped off from a magazine at the day. I'm not saying it was good, but I got it done. I used anything and everything I could find to complete story layouts, and I fell in love. It was exhilarating, and it was the beginning of me figuring out how to do this, the beginning of my actual education. Not just an education in designing. I mean, it kind of was, if you can call it that. It was so rudimentary at the point that it's sort of microscopic in nature. But it was an education in get things done, and only then can good things happen. I didn't quite articulate this to myself that way at the time, but since then it's become the motto that I basically live by, and it's what I'm going to spend the rest of this talk telling you about. Most of the rest. I have one more stop to make. An incredibly lucky thing happened to me in my second senior year, in the final semester of that last year in college. And that was, as I was finishing an art minor and spending a crazy amount of time drawing 2 comics a week, and then spending a crazy amount of time figuring out how to put a magazine together for print. This lucky thing happened. And I want to call out luck because there's an element of luck to everything that's so important. But you have to do the work to be ready for that luck if and when it happens to you. So the lucky thing that happened to me was that the fine art department, the department I had recently returned to get an art minor so I could put off the real world by 1 year to figure my life out, wanted to produce a student journal of art. And they had the idea that they could partner with a local design firm in the area to put this piece together. The fine arts department. Fine arts. Not graphic arts, not commercial art. The school had no graphic arts classes, let alone a graphic art department. So can you guess who was the only student in the fine art department who knew anything about graphic art by sheer luck at this point? This guy. So I got an interview with this local design firm, Brown & Company, in Portsmouth, which I went into startlingly overconfident. with my left hand drawn comics and my poorly put together magazine, thinking that I knew way more than I knew because I understood kind of like how to lay out text in Quark Express. But it was enough to get me the internship because there were no better candidates. And that internship produced this art journal, which Eric Evanson has a piece in. And my process of working with the design firm on this journal was enough to get me an internship there when I graduated to continue on. So I did it. In 5 years, I graduated from college, go me. I started at Brown & Company in an internship capacity. When I started there in this internship, it was basically all dirty work. I brought design comps to clients all over town because there were no PDFs you could email to people in those days. I took out trash. I did a ton of comping. No task was too small. Anything they needed done for dirty work or project work, I was there to do. And in exchange, all the designers there took time with me and they started bringing me slowly on board with small projects. I started out just doing minor things. Then I got assigned more complicated projects. Eventually, I was allowed to interface with clients. This was really where I started learning this stuff that I had no business doing. And don't get me wrong, learning on the job at Brown & Company was great, but the little scraps I was getting at that point, while hugely educational, weren't scratching any kind of creative itch for me. And maybe you can sense I like to do things. So I started teaching myself Adobe Illustrator on the side, just doing little drawings like this. Not good, but they're a start. You know, I knew nothing about Illustrator when I started at Brown & Company. I knew nothing about Photoshop. I knew Quark Express and that was it. So as a big believer in keeping busy and assigning extra work to myself, I started to get bored even as I was learning and look for a bigger project, a personal project, something that I would want to do in my off time just for the love of doing it. My first side projects naturally took the form of comic books, which, as we've established, I loved. I'm a comic nerd. I met a guy at the local comic shop named Rich Woodall, and he was trying to get a comic book off the ground. He had a concept, and I don't want to say he was stuck. I don't think that's the right word, but he was stalled. He was looking for someone to help him flesh out all these crazy ideas he had and turn it into a real comic. So we happened to have complementary skills. He thought in these big, grand ideas, but I was very practical and good at focusing them down into something doable. So we started on this comic, co-writing it together and building the world, and we just totally dove in. Rich penciled the comic. I inked it, I lettered it, I did the book design, I did coloring for the covers. My graphic design skills that I was learning came in really handy. And our first comic was called Johnny Raygun, and it's the very definition of a personal project. Certainly, no one was asking for two unknown comic nerds to put out this comic, this humorous sci-fi retro comic. But it was exactly the kind of thing that we liked, and it was the kind of thing we were excited about enough to throw in. Anyone here who makes comics knows it's a time vortex. It takes just a tremendous amount of time to do this. Through that comic shop, where I actually became much better friends with Eric over the years, over our shared love of comics. Another one of our friends was managing the comic, and he had the idea that he wanted to be a comic publisher, and he agreed to publish this book. So it ran for 7 issues, and it was, I would say, very, very modestly successful. Modestly commercially successful, I should say, because everything I learned from doing that book benefits me today still. The process of undertaking a project that was way too big, way more than I could have conceived of, and spending so much time doing this, I still live by today. And this is where that motto I talked about earlier really solidified for me, which is get things done and only then can good things happen. Because if you're trying to get work in illustration, design, game design, animation, nothing's going to happen for you until you've demonstrated that you can do the work. Nothing's going to happen until you start to have a body of work. And there's no body of work until you make one. And when you get out of school, if you don't find a job right away, no one's going to be asking you to make that work. It's going to be on you to do it. And this sounds like a simple concept, even as I say it, but it took me so long to figure it out and internalize it. I spent so much time waiting for permission or waiting for someone to ask me to do something that even with all this stuff, I wasted a lot of time. So I think it's worth saying this. There are just a million reasons you can come up with not to start a project. And even though I like projects and I like to keep busy, I'm guilty of that too. Coming up with an idea, putting pencil to paper, or putting a stylus to your screen, it's intimidating. And when I did start a project, often I learned that finishing that project was even harder. It was even harder than starting it. So I could convince myself that a project I was working on was good enough and then set it aside, or not good enough and abandon it forever. But with the Johnny Raygun comic, we solicited it in previews, which is how comic shops order comics, and we did get orders. And so suddenly there was a very real deadline, and I had no choice but to finish it. And what I learned from this comic book making experience was that even though the book wasn't a big commercial hit like we hoped it would be, it was that it was valuable time. And I came to learn that any time spent making something is more valuable than time not spent making something. And time spent making something is better than time spent thinking about making something. Okay, so I mentioned at the beginning of this talk that I've been at Brown & Company ever since college, and I've been very fortunate for that, incredibly fortunate. It's provided me with a lot of stability in life, including vacation time, which I'm using to be here to talk to you now. In my time at Brown & Company, I've worked on hundreds of projects, logos, websites, magazines, book covers, huge branding projects, small branding projects, t-shirts, banners, menus, signage, ads, event planning, podcasts, music videos, animation. I once built a wooden jack-in-the-box that flowers popped out of for a pitch to a florist. And we did not get the job, but the box was really good. But you know what kind of projects I somehow didn't end up doing a lot of at Brown & Company? Illustration. I had worked professionally for over a decade there, and I was not getting the kind of illustration opportunities that I hoped for. And Johnny Raygun, when it petered out, I kind of entered into a wandering in the wilderness phase, waiting for someone to give me an assignment that they weren't going to because I didn't have the illustration body of work. That opportunity kind of evaporated in my hand. And even though I had spent time making comics, it didn't translate to other kinds of things that I hoped to do. So I decided I needed to start doing projects if I was going to get any kind of thing that I wanted to do. So I started making things for friends. If a friend in a band had a gig coming up, I'd ask them if they wanted a poster. There was a blog I used to follow that was about modern psychedelic music, The Active Listener, and I just emailed the guy and I said, hey, would you like some cover art for any of these compilations? And they said yes. There was a local arts organization in town putting on concerts, and I emailed them and said, you know, would you like posters for your concerts? Would you like posters for your speaker series? And I don't want to be inappropriate, but is it okay if I drop an F-bomb? Yeah, okay, free. I did the work for free. That's a contentious topic, and I know everyone has their own opinion on whether you should work for exposure bucks or not, and I'm just telling you what I did as a guy trying to build a portfolio in the context of getting work that would pay me. In this case, I was the person asking people for the work. I was the one soliciting the free work. No one was taking advantage of me because I wasn't doing anything, and I very consciously chose who I approached. And more importantly, I knew I needed the practice badly. I had nothing better to do and just tons of free time. So you might say, hey, Matt, these aren't really personal projects, are they? They're technically for clients. And I think yes or no. When I talked to them and I said, can I do some art for your organization? And they said yes. I said, okay, here's the catch. You don't have to pay me, but I'm going to do what I want to do, and you don't get to offer me direction or feedback. And I'm not interested in notes, so if that's cool with you, let's do it. And if not, yeah, no harm done. And that was a good approach for me. Even in all this time that I did this, I never had a client reject the work that I ended up handing in. It's hard to reject free work anyway. But and one thing I will also say is that I've looked at a lot of student portfolios over the years, and I've looked at portfolios when I've been tabling at comic conventions, and one thing that really helps a portfolio stand out is having some client work in it. So I know this sounds funny in a talk about personal projects, but if you can, when you initiate this stuff, partner with a friend doing a show or something like that, it does show someone looking at the work that you have some kind of interaction with a client. It's not just you sitting in a room 100% following your own muse and never putting a project out or doodling the same thing over and over or something like that. So a key takeaway that I got out of this is to diversify your personal projects. Maybe you just like drawing, like D&D characters or something like that, and that's great. But ideally, that won't be the only thing you work on. These personal projects, because you are bringing them up, are your chance to spread your wings and practice. So in that spirit, you want to practice the things you're not good at as well. That's the only way to get better at it. During this time period when I was approaching these local places and asking them for work, I also fell in love with alternate movie posters, particularly the amazing stuff that Mondo was putting out. Mondo seemed like a dream client and I desperately wanted to work at them, but it felt like a dream. I wasn't at that level. So I started making my own posters. That was my next big self-initiated project. And I know they weren't great. I think some were okay, some were not good, some were better than others. But I knew if I ever stood a chance of maybe getting a call from Mondo, I was going to have to do a lot of this kind of stuff. And I was not afraid to fail because I was just putting this stuff out. And that's another big lesson that I took from personal projects. Your personal projects don't have to be good, but you still have to do them. So I looked at a lot of these posters as glorified practice. And maybe the end result will be good enough to put in your portfolio, and maybe it won't. And maybe you've completed a piece you're not totally happy with, but that's better than not completing a piece at all. And I just can't say enough how important that is. Just finish things. Don't noodle on them forever. Just finish them. The only way you'll end up with a piece you're proud of is if you do a whole bunch of pieces that you're not quite proud of. So that thought of completing pieces and not just abandoning them, that's a hard lesson to internalize too, because I did find it's way easier to stop working on something or finesse over some important detail in the hope that that will save it forever, and you'll never really call it done. So when you're working on these projects, also remember this: perfect is the enemy of finished. And I will say, I did a lot of these posters. They were great practice, and in doing a bunch of them, one finally hit for me. I kept putting stuff out on the internet. This Ice King poster that I did was pitched by our local comic shop owner, the same guy who had published Johnny Ray-Gun, to Boom Studios, who was publishing Adventure Time. And it got me a gig doing some retailer incentive covers for a few books. So it was my first paid comic work after like 10 years of floundering about. And the comic work was great. But I still wanted to do poster stuff. I still wanted to hit on illustration stuff even harder. So it was time for me to think about a piece that was bigger than one piece. I was inspired by Inktober, that thing where people get cues and they do an ink drawing a day. And in October, it's usually scary themed, right up my alley, big horror nerd. And I liked the idea of needing to complete a piece a day. Like working on my speed was another component of this. And I liked the idea of posting them because there was an accountability to that. posting a new piece on the internet every single day meant that I had my small following looking for things. And even though this small following didn't really care if I finished a piece or not, if I started a project on October 1st, I was going to be so embarrassed if I just, flamed out by October 10th. So I decided I wanted to take the Inktober concept a little further, and I came up with this idea of 31 Days of Monsters, where I would draw a monster portrait once a day, and I would do them with color, and I would do a little scene in the middle. So they're not super complicated, but if you're working on speed, it was kind of like a good goal to be able to crank things out. And I love the monster thing. So for me, this was not hard to do. I think in a personal project, it's important to like what you're doing. I know I've said to diversify. You can diversify within things you like. So liking the horror stuff, it wasn't grueling for me. If you're committing to a big thing, there is an element of needing to like it if you're going to follow through. And I want to say at this point too that a lot of the stuff I'm showing you is fan art, and we're talking about existing IP. And I focused on that specifically, not because I wanted to be a fan artist forever, but because I thought they would lead me to the types of projects that I ultimately wanted to do. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but fan art is not what you have to do for a personal project by any stretch, and nor should it be all that you do. That's why I was also trying to mix in those small client projects to do that as well. In fact, like I said, diversify what you're doing, and that's very important. Anyway, back to the monsters. Starting this project made me realize something important, which was something I did talk about: perfect is the enemy of finished. They can't be perfect. And this ties back to when I started drawing with my left hand in college. The feeling that something doesn't have to be perfect is so freeing. And when your brain takes that pressure off of having to be perfect, good things start happening. So my lesson here is putting pressure on takes pressure off. A piece a day is going to be hard to do. And you're working publicly by committing to posting online, and that's hard to do. That's putting a lot of pressure on yourself. But with those constraints, you know that what you do can't be perfect. It's just not going to be. Some of these I'm happy with even years later, and some of them I realize are very bad. But it took the pressure off, and that's really important. It's volume, you're cranking stuff out. So when I started this project, another fun thing happened, which was that my small following was kind of into it, and they started rooting for me. And I took the opportunity to run Twitter polls, Twitter RIP, and ask people what I should draw for the day. And it became this interactive community where I was talking to people. So work publicly and embrace that feedback, embrace that community. And don't just wait for people to give to you, give back to them too. And you will also find while you do this that people aren't going to love everything you do. You'll get some nice comments and you'll get some annoying comments, and you'll only remember the annoying comments. But just keep doing your thing. Just block out the noise. And the last thing I learned from this project was that it's a lot harder to start a project than it is to keep one going. So my lesson here when you're working is that momentum is everything. Once you're in the swing of things, something switches in your brain and you're just focused on getting to the next deadline. Get the next piece done, keep going. And I honestly couldn't believe how much easier the 20th piece was than the first piece. When 31 Days of Monsters ended, I did though kind of want to collapse. It was an amazing but tiring experience. But the feeling that I got from completing a bigger project than these one-offs made me want to keep doing more stuff. So while I searched for my next project, I kept fitting in posters in small client bits where I could, just for the practice, because I always like to keep going. Momentum is everything. But I started a project that would end up taking almost a decade. And that project was Better Call Saul. So in February 2015, this show debuted, Better Call Saul. I don't know if people today still know, but it was a prequel to the hugely popular Breaking Bad series, of which I was a big fan. And Better Call Saul followed Jimmy McGill, a down-on-his-luck lawyer who would grow into this sort of monster that you would eventually or had already run into on Breaking Bad. Saul was a prequel. And an artist that I admired, Francesco Francavilla, had drawn episode posters for some episodes of Breaking Bad. And I thought they were really cool. And I was like, episode posters, could I do that? I thought I'd give it a try. So when the show came out, I did my first poster. I watched the episode and I did this poster. And I uploaded it to Twitter and didn't think much about it. But to my surprise, Vince Gilligan, the creator of the show, his assistant, Jen, who ended up becoming a producer, retweeted the poster and said nice things. And that was like this nugget of validation that I was so happy about. So I kept going, the next poster and the next and the next. And with every new poster, I had more people excited about them and more people from the show itself saying nice things. I think crucially, I wasn't selling these, so Sony wasn't upset with me. The showrunners weren't upset to me. I was just drawing them and posting them online for practice and hoping to get someone to notice them. Before I knew it, a photo was tweeted from the show's official following showing a wall in their writer's room with a ton of fan art. So Jen, the assistant who had been kind of casting a net on the web to find what kind of fan art was out there, was doing that for all the people creating stuff. But guess what? I was doing volume. I ended up getting, this was what, 6 episodes in? I was taking over more and more of this wall. So Saul's first season finished up in May of that year, I want to say, and I was pretty sure that I would pick this project up again by the time season 2 came out, whenever that would be. When the next October rolled around, I wanted another month-long project, but I wanted to go even bigger this time. I wondered if I could do more than draw a monster a day. I wondered if I could compose an entire alternate movie poster per day, drawing, layout, typesetting. Even to me, and I'm kind of a maniac, it seemed like a lot. And I knew from the year before that if I undertook this project on day 1, I was not going to stop until day 31 because I would not want egg on my face publicly. But this taught me something that I still believe, which is that it's okay to think big. If I had failed, there were no real stakes other than my own pride. But it still gave me permission to seek something that would be hard to do, to challenge myself. And a lot of people were doing Inktober, which I do love, but I thought, if I do Inktober, I'm going to get lost in the sea of Inktober. If I do something big, someone's going to think this guy is insane, and maybe they would tune in and pay attention. So it was time for 31 days of horror. I started on these posters, and like the year before, right from the beginning, people were excited about them. They went over well online. And I got a lot of questions as to how I was actually doing this. Like, did I cheat and do them ahead of time? And because I was holding down a full-time job, all my Brown & Company stuff. But the answer was just stealing time whenever I could. If I was in the shower that morning, I was thinking about the poster. If I was at lunch, I was doing a sketch. I was eating kind of crappy food for dinner and drawing until bedtime and staying up too late, and then starting the process over again the next day. But doing this project, a cool thing started happening. Movie directors and producers and actors in the films that I was drawing started retweeting the work, and some followed me, and some started messaging me, can I get a copy of this to hang in my office? Can I get a copy of this to send to the star of the film? Big horror news websites started running articles on this. Check out what this lunatic is doing. So this project got me a lot of attention. It was the first time that anything I ever did started kind of traveling beyond a small circle on the internet. I did finish the month. I got the 31 done, and it was even more tiring than I thought it would be, but I had momentum. And as I learned, momentum is everything. So all of this attention and social media followers and nice comments and stuff was really exciting, but I can't say it led to any work at the time. And so if you're doing this stuff, just remember that success may be slow. In fact, it probably will be slow. But then again, I'm sure there are a lot more talented people than me in this room, and success will be faster for you. But even without success, that was okay, because every poster I made was making me better at this job. It was pushing me. It was getting me ready for someday when someone did ask me for something. Doing this kind of thing, you can see I altered styles, I altered colors. This pushed me to try different illustration styles. It pushed me to try different design styles. It pushed me to try different typographical solutions. It pushed me to use colors I would never think of using. It pushed me to try things that I didn't think would work just because I had a deadline to hit and I had to get something done. So if you undertake a personal project, if you undertake a big personal project, switch it up. When you're doing a piece a day or something like that, you have to switch it up just so you're not repeating yourself. And it's okay to switch it up because remember, the personal project isn't just meant to get you work. It's meant to stretch your wings and get you better prepared for when the work does come. Halloween came around again, and I did it again. I did the sequel, 31 Days of Horror 2. More practice, more retweets, more articles, less sleep, but this time a job opportunity. One of the Hollywood types that followed me in the middle of this poster making madness was a guy who worked at Marvel Studios. He was the head of their 3D division. And he was a horror fan in addition to working for Marvel, and he enjoyed seeing the posters I was putting out on a daily basis. And one day on Twitter, I got a direct message from him. Would I be open to working on a commission? What's the commission? Well, we have this movie coming up called Avengers of Infinity War, and we would like to do a poster that we can give out to cast and crew as a wrap gift when the film is over. I couldn't believe that. I would do that commission. I would have done that as a personal project. So after some back and forth and me signing the longest, most intimidating contract I had ever seen, I was officially doing a project for Marvel Studios. I got access to photos and clips from the movie, all watermarked with my name, so I couldn't share them with anyone. I hope Marvel will not mind me showing you a rendering of the Infinity Gauntlet 8 years later at this point. This was not like a personal project at all. Working with clients who are paying you to do a job with their well-established IP is not like doing a personal project. And working with a client the size of Marvel or Disney is another thing entirely. So there were lots of sketches. There was specific pieces of direction that seemed very granular. There were stakeholders to please. There were rounds of revisions, rounds of requests. It's very much work with a capital W. But this is where my years of actually working with clients really paid off, both at my day job and with my earlier personal projects, which were more illustration in nature, so I knew how to react to illustration revision requests. And I knew how to turn direction and feedback into something actionable, and I knew how to keep this stuff on schedule. And most importantly, I knew not to make a promise that I couldn't keep. I knew how to keep things moving along, and I knew how to take feedback professionally and not personally. So this is the final poster we ended up with. It's downstairs in the gallery. I hope maybe you'll go take a look if you haven't. And I'm still proud of it. So I'll point out that in a piece like this, all of these characters are the size they are because of client direction. Spider-Man is where he is because of client direction, whereas the Guardians of the Galaxy are way back where they are because of client direction. Stan Lee is prominent by client direction. There are some Marvel executives right beyond Stan Lee, like Kevin Feige, who are there by client request. Things that wouldn't occur to you, but it's a very specific client need, so you work it in. This poster went over very well. My contact at Marvel was kind enough to text me photos of this hanging up in the Marvel headquarters and at the IMAX corporate headquarters and places like that. And it went well enough that they brought me back for 2 more projects to wrap up whatever phase that was of Marvel. The first being Captain Marvel, which was a fun challenge. So as I mentioned, the guy that contracted with me worked in the 3D division, so he loved 3D stuff. he wanted to do a poster in 3D. And so this was drawn in one color and then stereo separated. It's maybe like the coolest IRL thing to look at in the gallery downstairs because there are 3D glasses so you can see the giant hand pop out. And I will shout out Eric for helping me finesse Captain Marvel's butt and her hand. Eric is my go-to when I'm illustrating and it's not working out. He always knows just what to tell me to get me back on track. The third poster that they brought me back for was Avengers Endgame. By this time, Stan Lee had sadly passed away, so he could not appear in the poster, but a major goal for Marvel was to do a tribute to him, so I made this theater and the neon lights with Stan's name, and then they wanted kind of a crowd below with some of those Marvel executives and some of the more human characters that appeared, like Gwyneth Paltrow, Pepper Potts, that kind of thing, which are odd to me choices that I never would have put in a poster, but when you do a personal project, you are the ultimate boss. When you do a client project, they are the ultimate boss. Better Call Saul kept coming back to me year after year, and I kept making episode posters, and the cast and crew kept reposting them, and Michael McKean was emailing me asking for a copy of his poster to hang in his place, and Bob Odenkirk, no, not Bob Odenkirk, he didn't tweet at me until the very last episode, but every other cast member did. But the point was that the cast and crew, and more importantly the producers, Vince Gilligan himself, became a fan of my posters, which is maybe my crowning achievement. And so one day I got this call to, I'll pause that for a second. I got a call from Mondo, who is partnering with Sony to produce the Breaking Bad movie vinyl soundtrack. And Vince Gilligan liked my posters from seeing them over and over in the writer's room and thought I would be the right person to do this soundtrack artwork. So I hit like 2 dream clients with one project somehow. It's totally the jackpot of my life for me. So I was elated to accept this job. I thought I would waltz into this assignment and knock this out of the park because Vince Gilligan was a fan of my work and I was just going to waltz in there and do this. That is not what happened at all. There's this funny thing that happens when you build a portfolio and you start getting hired for work where a client hires you specifically because they like what you have done, and then they hire you for that work, and then they don't like what you're doing for them at all. So on El Camino, that's what happened. I went through round after round after round after round after round of concept sketches, and nothing was working for them. This actually wasn't upsetting to me by this point because I've been in the game long enough to understand that this happens, even if someone likes your work. And so what I can tell you is in your personal projects that are put on the internet, in your client work that someone gives you, take feedback professionally, not personally. You are not your work. The comments don't apply to you. They apply to what you're doing. And they may hit and they may not hit for any variety of reasons that are out of your control. You may put out exactly what you think is the answer and hit it out of the park in your own mind. And for some ultra specific reason, it doesn't work and you get a mean or deflating comment. Just take it professionally and move on. It doesn't really matter. You got to remove yourself from the work you're doing. So this is the album that we ended up coming up with after months and months of refinements. And you can even see that some of the stuff I pitched in these sketches was not wasted time. It ended up on the sleeves. It ended up on the back cover. No time making stuff is wasted time. It all cumulatively adds up to something good. But again, you have to spend countless hours to get there. There's kind of no shortcut. And luckily I had, so that when these projects came around, I was ready to do them. I was ready to do what I feel is a pretty good job. I'll give you a few final words. There have been so many other personal projects I've done that I haven't talked about, and so many other client pieces that I haven't talked about. My horror posters that I showed you led to an opportunity to exhibit at Gallery 1988 in LA, first as part of group shows and then whole shows of my exhibition. Some of this stuff is downstairs. That client work, that personal work led to a gallery work that led to creative directors in LA seeing my work and hiring me for Entertainment Weekly, for the Los Angeles Times, things like that. If you want to talk to me later, I'll happily tell you about any of that stuff. It led to me doing comic work for Archie Comics, who saw these parody comics and I thought they'd be mad, but instead they hired me to actually do official work for them. So to close, I'll just give you a couple high-end bullet points. Don't wait for permission. No one's going to ask you to make stuff for them until they see that you can make it. And don't worry about getting an idea. An idea is not going to come until you work at getting the idea, at least for me. They don't hit out of bolt out of the sky. So pick up your pencil, pick up your stylus, just sketch, just see what comes of it. Make stuff you like. If you focus on stuff you like, that idea that's hard to get is maybe going to come a little bit easier. And like I said, for me, focusing on some properties I like worked well. That just happens to play into my strengths. And it happened to play into my goals of getting work drawing that stuff. That might not be your goal though. That's cool. Do your thing. Make a lot of stuff, more than you possibly think is necessary. If you love doing this, find time to do it. It's never wasted. But while you're doing this, make sure you're not doing the same thing over and over and over. I could have just drawn monsters and turned them into posters, but I did Archie stuff and it led to that job. You know, you never know where something will take you, so go in some different directions. And turn your weaknesses into strength. When I started this, I would say I was pretty bad at color. I could not do like intense rendering stuff. But I turned that weakness into a strength. It became incorporated into my style. I don't worry about doing a painterly style now because that's not what I do. I figured out what I do and I turned a weakness into something that I think I'm pretty decent at. And then, you know, finally, don't listen to me. This stuff I found helpful. It set me on a path. It may not apply to you, but hopefully some parts of it do. You may have a completely different path. I'm sure you have a completely different path and probably a better path than I do. There are just a million ways into any of the careers you're trying to get into. So experiment and find what works for you. And you know, you probably have more talent than me anyway, so it's going to be an easier road. So listen to yourself. You'll know when you're on the right path. I do strongly believe that when you've done the work, there's this magical moment where things click into place and clarity comes, and there's really no better feeling in the world, but you can't get there until all of that. The road is going to be longer for some and shorter for others, so hang in there, do your coursework, don't only do your coursework. Find a challenge for yourself and do it, do the personal stuff. And your portfolio is going to get better, and your skills are going to get better, and your dream client will find you, and you will be ready for them when they do. You'll be ready to jump on it. So, thanks for coming to my TED Talk.